Hello, NomadManians, and welcome to the first ever NomadMania webinar. I am super excited to be doing this, and I'll tell you something, I've never done a webinar before, so here we go. The idea is that on the last Saturday of every month, NomadMania will be having a webinar on a different topic. Some of these topics will come from our polls, some will be informational, we might have a mini conference, the sky is the limit. And the idea here is that NomadMania is upping the game and we are really doing things for the travel community. So thank you very much for being here. Today's topic is the famous, or should I say infamous, what is a visit? And that implies what is a minimal visit. But before I actually start about this, let us remember, for those of you who are uninitiated, what exactly is NomadMania? So what is NomadMania? NomadMania is a website that was founded 10 years ago now. It started in 2012. It's almost 11 years, to be honest. So we've been around for quite a long time, and we divide the world into 1,301 regions. So we don't believe in countries only. We believe that in order to be a really accomplished traveler, you have to go much further. And so we've got our regions, and then we've also got a second list of another 1,301 regions, and we call this the quirky regions, many quirky places. And this is a list that we believe is the future of travel. It's totally crazy. I personally love it. And I think that's the one that is going to grow. Apart from these lists, which also link to lists of other clubs, we've got about 70,000 places recommended for you to visit. They are divided in our famous series, as we call them. You name it, aquariums, museums on aviation, dark side things, all different categories that might interest very different demographics are in there. Now, beyond our lists, NomadMania is much more. We are developing into a social club in the sense of bringing travelers together. So we have the Travel Awards, which are awarded once a year in an event. And we've already announced that this year we're going to have our very first live Travel Awards in Lviv, Ukraine on October 21st. So be there. We are also the only website which verifies traveler claims. And this is important for our presentation today, because when you try to prove you've been somewhere, your visit needs to count. So anyway, we verify people to make sure that they really have been where they claim. Of course, we can't verify everyone. We verify the people at the top of our ranks. And so up to now, we have verified more than 200 people. And of course, we also have our famous UN Masters list. I would say we are arguably the best resource to find out who has been to every single country out of 193. And that you can find in NomadMania's UN Masters list. Right now, we can have a bit of a debate exactly how many UN Masters there are. Let's say it's between 250 and 300, depending on your definition of visit. And as you see, the issue of definition of visit is tricky. So before I actually get into our presentation, why is this important? Why should anyone care what is a visit? Well, guys, this is important. I would say that every travel club ends up with rules, but the problem is the rules are always different. Some clubs have a 24-hour rule. One club has a 24-hour rule in the Vatican. Now, that sounds absurd. Why would you want to go to the Vatican and have to be like a clochard against the wall for 24 hours to legitimate that visit? How does that increase your experience or your understanding of the Vatican? But, it's not my position to judge anyone. The example here is just to show that rules really differ. For someone else, crossing the line to the Vatican would be like, yeah, I've done it, I'm gone, I don't need to spend more than 5 seconds here. So this is important because NomadMania, as a serious travel community, wants to create a definition that can be accepted and with which everyone can work, if you want, on a fair basis. I would say fairness is the name of the game. If people are using different criteria, it results in a very unfair outcome. And that is not what we like here. We like fairness. So this is one reason why this is very important. I would say the second reason is precisely verification. If we as a site want to be verifying people's travels, we need to be clear about what we will accept as a visit. If someone has only been to an airport, they may legitimately think, okay, I've actually been there. Yes, they believe they've done the country. So unless we have a very clear rule, which is written and understood so that people can figure out, okay, maybe I haven't been to the country, then they would be totally justified in not understanding it. So I would say this is indeed a very important issue. What is a visit? And this is something that needs to be considered, and the end should be made. And so what we did in the last year is create a community-based vote on this. So last summer, we had a poll on NomadMania with about 20 questions, 20 different scenarios, with our mascots, Trav and Ling, getting into all sorts of absurd situations. And we asked our community, do you consider this a visit or don't you? And almost 1,000 of you voted there. We repeated this last winter in February and March in order to, first of all, verify some of the results, which were very close, but also expand to different categories of issues. And again, more than 800 votes were cast. And there we have it. We've got the community vote. So this is no longer me telling you. This is no longer a committee telling you. This is no longer NomadMania telling you. This is you telling us what is a visit. Now, obviously, in a vote, you get different percentages. Some margins are very high, and it is what I would call a definitive vote. Some margins are very small. The closest margin we had was 3 votes. However, what we decided is that we will honor the vote in every case. So whether it was 3 votes or 900 votes difference, we honor the vote, and the majority in every vote is the one that we make the standard NomadMania policy for what is a visit. So once again, this is your vote. Every vote counted. If you didn't vote, you should have. If you weren't yet a NomadMania member or you didn't know about us, fair enough. Apologies, you should have known before, because we are really good. But anyway, those who voted hopefully share the idea that a democratic vote on this is probably the best. Now, before I start presenting a final note, we are talking about minimal visit. Now, as again, a serious travel club, we do not like minimal visits. Minimal visit is like the least you can do. And that is not necessarily good. We like good visits. We like visits where you really go and really explore and see everything a place has to offer. But ultimately, what we want to be defining is what is the least you can do in a place, which will count as a visit for NomadMania. In this presentation, we will divide things into 4 sections based on style of travel. And here you can see it. We've got vehicles, we've got planes, we've got railways, we've got maritime travel. At the end, there are some miscellaneous categories where we'll go into further. So without further ado, let me start with vehicle travel, or otherwise we can call this overland travel. And in each case, I will start with what is not a visit, a minimal visit always, and then I will continue with what is a visit. So vehicle travel, Lovely graphics. Here are Trav and Ling taking you around the world on cars, buses, or perhaps on foot. And what is not a visit? Well, here we go. First of all, crossing a borderline or any imaginary line of a region, taking a photo of, let's say, a plaque and then saying, bye, I'm done, I'm out of here. That does no longer count as a visit, a minimal visit to a country or a region. Now, it was clear from the vote that people were begging for us to accept some sort of experience as a minimal visit. And now this is where we run into trouble because we cannot define what a meaningful experience is. I would say deep in our heart of hearts, we know what a meaningful experience is, but crossing a line, let's say in the desert, and then going back, there's nothing very meaningful about that. So I would say we need to use our better judgment. Meaningful might be contacts with locals. Meaningful might be seeing a significant site. That is meaningful. Crossing a borderline is rejected and is no longer enough for a minimal visit. The second very interesting thing we found from your vote is that being in a country or a region without stopping and without having a notable experience does not count as a minimal visit. This was rejected by 89% of the voters. That is huge. Okay, 89% is a definitive result. Now, in the polls, the example given was of Ling traveling from Greece to Serbia by car and crossing North Macedonia. And in one of the examples, she just crosses into North Macedonia and keeps driving on the highway, leaves North Macedonia after an hour and a half. She's never stopped. She's never really looked around to see what's going on around her. Does that count as a visit? And you said, no, it does not. So that is not good enough. But what is even more interesting is point 3 here. And that is that even if she stops, say, at a gas station to fill up, and even if she gets out of the car at the gas station, that still doesn't count as a visit. It's not an experience. It's not meaningful enough. And this was rejected by 60 up to 72% of your votes, depending on different scenarios. So again, we conclude that being in a country without stopping, being in a country without really having any meaningful experience, even if you stop at the gas station, that is not enough. Now, an interesting thing, again, is that if you only stop at a transport hub overland, if you, for example, change buses at the bus station, this also doesn't count. This was rejected by 70%. And this was even rejected in the case where at the bus station, you very quickly go out and have a look at the highway, for example, or at the main road, and then go back into the bus station. So this was rejected by 52%. So that was a closer vote. But as I said before, we are following the majorities in every case. So people want more. The voters want an experience. And let's have a look at what does count as a minimal visit. And this is where we are going a bit nuclear, because up to now, there was this unspoken rule in the travel communities that your foot must always touch the ground. But actually, based on your vote, this is not needed anymore. So on the one hand, it may seem we're much stricter. We're not accepting a gas station as a visit. But on the other hand, we are accepting that you can have a meaningful visit even if your foot never touches the ground. Let's look at this. So first of all, being in a country and stopping briefly to have an experience of a cultural or natural site, this does count as a visit. So if you're driving down and you see a beautiful mountain, which is known, as one of the highlights of a region, and you stop the car, you get out and you take a photo of the mountain and, breathe in the fresh air and enjoy yourself, yes, then this is a meaningful visit because the site you've seen is meaningful. Or if there's an archaeological site by the road, even if you stop for a little bit and you look at the ruins from afar, take a couple of pictures, this is enough. People were willing to accept this by 70%. However, here is the second point in this slide, which is important. If you see a significant site in a private vehicle without getting out of the vehicle, that still counts as a visit. This was accepted in different scenarios from 63 to 76% of the people who voted. So in our example, I remember Trav and Ling came into Croatia from Slovenia. They crossed the border, and if you've done that, you know that Zagreb is very near to the Slovenian border. And in our hypothetical example, they go to Zagreb and they drive around for an hour, but they can't find any parking. They give up. They just look at all the sites, and then they head back to Slovenia. And the question was, have they visited Zagreb? And so the answer is yes, they have. They never actually touched the ground, but it counts because they've had a meaningful experience. They've actually seen enough. Things are a bit different with public transport, and this is possibly because you don't really control things in public transport. So in a private car of your own, you basically go where you want, so you see what you want. But in public transport, you're dependent on others. So in that case, you do need to touch the ground. And we will look at the rules for railway transport in a while. And so with public transport vehicles, the rule will be reflected in railway travel. So this is everything about vehicles, planes, trains, and automobiles. Well, automobiles, as it were. Let's look at planes. Let's look at airports. So in this, we're also going to touch on this famous or infamous way of seeing a place where people go and come back on the same plane. This is occasionally done, and people are sometimes very proud of it because they're like, look at me, I'm saving time. I'm not wasting time doing something I don't want to do. Well, if you don't want to do it, why are you doing it? That's a very valid question. Let's see what you voted on and what is not a visit in terms of planes. So every instance involving airports is not a visit, no matter what. And let us look at the categories here. So going through without crossing immigration, so an international transit, this was rejected by 95% of our voters. This was the highest rejection rate we got in the vote. And this is the case even if airside, there are many cultural activities going on. We gave an example where there was Oktoberfest in Munich and people were really, going for it and, stressing the culture. But no, your vote was like, no, airport visit, airside doesn't count. Even if you cross immigration and stay at the airport, this was rejected by 85%, still a big percentage. Even if you leave the airport area and go out a little bit and have a very, very quick experience, so you look at the road quickly around, but that's it, there's no meaningful experience, this was still rejected by 61%. So it's not enough to leave the airport gate and walk for 300 meters and then walk back. This was the same for all domestic transits in terms of regions. And overflights were also rejected by 87%. So even in cases where sometimes it's even better to overfly a place, like with an island, you get a better view of it from above. But people were like, no, an overflight is not good enough. So we have to reject it. The other issue here is going and coming back on the same flight. Now, if we're rejecting airports, then we need to reject this as well. Even in cases like, say, Tuvalu. Okay, you land in Tuvalu, and I was there a month ago, so I remember this very clearly. You land in Tuvalu, you leave the airport, and you're straight out. And on airport day, there's these great ladies there, these very, very lovable old women who are selling all sorts of trinkets. And you get a pretty good idea of Tuvalu by seeing these ladies, and you might interact with them a bit. And then you go straight back into the airport and you're out on the same plane. This is not a minimal visit, okay? It's not, because it doesn't really show an experience and you're still within the airport area. So for all of you who have come and gone on the same flight, I'm sorry, this can't count. The only way we'll count this is if you had enough time to take a car, go far away from the airport, even if it was very quickly, and see a significant sight. This is the same as with vehicle travel. So you left the airport, let's say you drove for 10 minutes, you saw a significant sight, then you managed to get back to the airport in time for the plane. This is a minimal visit, but only this. If you were within the airport, we can't count that. What does count as an airport minimal visit? There is only one exception we have. And this is a very quirky exception, but we gave this example and 62% accepted this. So if you've got a very small regional airport, one of those aerodromes where there's barely any building or a very small building, and often in those cases when the plane comes, it becomes a significant cultural day, so the whole community of the island meets, and they kind of that is their event. So if you're in that kind of situation, you land, you only experience this airport, which can never be an international airport, which usually doesn't have any security check, and you really have interaction with the locals, then we're going to give it to you. You're going to give it to you. You're the ones who voted. 62% accepted this. I would say that this kind of experience is relatively rare, though. So only then can we count an airport experience as a minimal visit. So we've done vehicles, we've done airports. Now let's look at railways. Okay, trains, and this affects especially travel in countries like Russia, where many people claim the Trans-Siberian and every region in their way as the train was going down. Well, sorry guys, it's not as easy as that. Okay, so let's see what you voted in terms of railways. What does not count as a minimal visit? So if you never got off the train, and it doesn't matter if it was day or night, it doesn't matter if you were asleep or awake, the result is clear in all the scenarios. Between 82 and 90% of respondents rejected this. No, 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 you cannot count it if you never got off the train. However, you can also not count it if you only got off the train in the train station area. This was rejected by 75% of the voters. So train station is not enough either. And here I will argue, yes, you can have a cultural experience. You have all these women selling things and whatever. Yes, it is a cultural experience, but your vote said no. This is not enough. We need more to consider it a minimal visit. Even a very quick stepping out of the station. So, you're running, the train is only going to be there for 15 minutes. You pray you'll make it. You get out of the station, you cross the road onto some square, you look around, and then you go back. No, you voted that is also not a minimal visit. And 56% rejected that. Again, we come back to this idea of experience. You need to have some sort of meaningful experience outside the train station. So what does count as a minimal visit? So for railway travel, it's always required to step into a region. And experiencing a noteworthy element of a region beyond the station or railway hub, this does count as a railway visit. Now, in our second poll, I gave Liechtenstein as the poll example. So it was traveling, and they were traveling from Austria to Buchs in Switzerland, and the train crosses Schaan in Liechtenstein. And there were various scenarios where they either stay on the train or they get off the train. And so you voted that even if they leave the train for 10 minutes in Schaan, go out and they've seen the theater, they see a cafe, they see the square, they kind of get an indication of the area. This was accepted as a visit by 55%. So again, the idea here is that you need to understand the region well enough. You need to have a meaningful experience or a meaningful memory. If you see a building that is significant, if you go into a shop, even for 2 minutes, you smell the sausages or something, that is good enough for a minimal visit. And again, going back to vehicle travel and transport hubs, let's say bus stations, I would say it's the same rule. So going out of the bus station for 1 minute and looking at the road, that doesn't cut it. But going out for 10 minutes and walking into a shop or, seeing a major landmark, that is good enough, and you can count it again as a minimal, not as a good visit. Now, we've done the first 3 categories of vehicles, airplanes, railways. The most complicated one is the 4th one, and that is maritime, the seas. Here things get a bit messier in terms of votes. Here we also had conflicting votes between the first and the second poll. When this happened, we considered the second poll's vote as more recent, as the kind of accurate one, or the one we will take as our policy. So let us look at ships, boats, vessels, yachts, anything like that, and look at what does not count as a visit. Well, first of all, and here throughout the presentation, I might have used the word seeing because that comes naturally to me. Let me say here that we prefer the word sensing because there's visually impaired people who clearly can't see, but who obviously can sense. So again, pardon me if I've been saying seeing all the time, but in our written document, we have always used sensing. So sensing from a vessel, from a ship, is never accepted as a visit, okay? Even if the ship is moored, but you don't get off it. So it's not good enough. This is what your vote was. Let me look at the percentages here. They were rejected in between 69 and 89% of the cases by you. So this is quite definitive, and it's a no. Now, being in the port area, this is where we had a discrepancy between the first and the second poll. In the first poll, we gave the example of St. Martin, and Trav and Ling get off only at the port, and they go duty-free shopping, and then they go back to the ship. And there, only 47% rejected this as a visit. However, in the second poll, we called Tunis as the stopover, and here 57% rejected Tunis port as a visit of Tunis. Maybe here the issue is that Tunis is seen as a bit more substantial than St. Martin, but we cannot look at places that way. We need to create a rule which is the same for all types of place. So based on the second vote, where this was rejected by 57%, we will say that a port area visit only does not count. However, there is good news for those minimalists here, because what does count is that leaving the port area, even for a tiny little bit, does count as a visit. So we can say here we are being a little bit more lenient compared to trains or cars. This was accepted by 60%, even in the most minimal departure from the port. There is a bit of a logic here, and that's that if you have experienced the place by ship, by virtue of it being open air, you probably have a better understanding of the natural environment than by doing it by a vehicle or by train. So we are willing to accept that. So you need to leave the port. Now, in many cases, there is no port, like on islands. in the middle of the Arctic, you're just getting off a vessel and putting your foot down. Well, this is where we will accept the old classic putting your foot into the region. This was accepted by quite a few people. So this counts if there is no port. Now, we come to two a bit thorny examples, and this is again where we're going a little bit nuclear and breaking with common practice up to now. The one case was experiencing something when you're in a river, and here we need to make sure we're talking about a river where you're in the same country and the same region. So let's give Budapest. This was the example in the poll. So Trav and Ling are on a vessel and they see Budapest from the Danube, from their boat, and they can see everything. If you know Budapest, you know that you can see the castle on the one side and the very famous parliament building on the other side, and you can see the trams, and you can basically understand the city. People were willing to accept this in the end with 51% of the vote. It's a close vote, but it was still the majority. So the rule here will be, even if you don't get off the vessel, if you're in a river and both sides of the river are the same country and same NomadMania region, and you see something substantial, this counts as a minimal visit. But it has to be substantial. You know, it can't just be endless flatlands where there's nothing to see. You need to experience something. It could be locals. You know, in Africa, you know, let's say on the River Congo, it could be experiencing people, you know, at the river bank, you know, washing clothes, whatever. That is, I would say, culturally substantial enough. But if you're only seeing endless countryside, which could be anywhere, that doesn't count. And what also doesn't count is if the river is a border between two countries or two regions. So many rivers, as you know, are borders. Let's say in the Danube has borders between Serbia, Romania, and then Bulgaria, Romania. If you're just going down there, you cannot say, oh, I visited Romania, when you never actually touched the ground there. That won't count. Now, the other case of nuclear, and this one goes back to our Bouvet trip in 2015, which is infamous because I was there and many other big travelers were there, and we failed to land. Now, we deliberately asked two questions on Bouvet in the poll. I was personally very curious to see what people would say. And I can say that I skipped that question. I didn't vote because I didn't want my vote to affect the result. We had two questions. The one was very classic. So it's foggy, you get onto the Zodiac, you get off on Bouvet, you manage to land, you put a foot down, you can't see anything but your foot is there, and you leave. Is that a visit? 82% said yes. The other example was, it's a beautiful day, at least it's clear, you can see the island well, but because of wind, you cannot get on the Zodiac. So you're kind of on the ship, but you're going around, you can see whatever wildlife they may be. Does this count as a visit? And the outcome here was, surprisingly to me, yes, 52% said this is good enough to be a visit. So extrapolating from this, what we're saying as NomadMania is that for uninhabited regions only, when you're visiting by boat, if you don't manage to land, but you are near enough to have a clear understanding of the natural ambience, this will count as a visit. And now here, let me first say that in terms of NomadMania's master list, the only uninhabited regions we have are in the Arctic and Antarctic regions, and also Mount Athos in the Southern European region. We will consider Mount Athos uninhabited in the sense of not having society in a traditional form. There's no such thing as family. There's no such thing as children. So For us, inhabited will have to be a kind of normal, quote unquote, environment where there are children and where the society replaces itself in a traditional way. So if you only have army, if you only have clergy in an area, this is not good enough to be called inhabited for us. We will treat that as uninhabited. And this means that for you ladies, we will accept Mount Athos as a minimal visit, not a good visit, a minimal visit if you have been on a boat cruise and you have seen enough of the monasteries there to be able to have an understanding of what they look like. Ideally with a very big camera, which has a good lens and can take photos from far away. Again, this is based on your Bouvet vote. I was quite surprised that it turned out this way. However, note that if you just see a little bit of the island from far away, you kind of glimpse the land, you cannot get away with it. You need to have what we call a good understanding of the natural ambience to count it as a minimal visit, and we think that is fair. Now, there are very many MQP regions on our secondary quirky list where you will find uninhabited islands galore, and there you can claim these as visited according to our rules. So we've been through 4 categories so far, but this is not the end of the presentation quite yet. And for those of you who have questions, I will address them, and you will obviously have your chance to write them, and we'll try to do our best with them when this is over. So let's look at some various categories, and again we'll go nuclear. We're NomadMania. We always go nuclear and do what people don't expect us to do. We're known for that, and that's why you love us and some of you hate us. So let's look at other categories. What counts as a minimal visit? Illegal visits count. So if you're legally in a place or not, and the other rules that have just been mentioned are all respected, this doesn't matter. This was accepted by 79% of your vote. Now, let me give an example here, which incorporates the previous rules. So let's say you're crossing the river from Liberia to Guinea, okay? So illegally, you don't have a Guinea visa, but you're like, let me quickly go to Guinea. If all you do is cross it, you touch the ground in Guinea, you're like, haha, I did it, and you're back, that does not count as a visit, okay? Because, you haven't really had a substantial experience there. But if you actually see a village, if you actually experience something there, with the locals, the fact that you don't have a visa doesn't matter. Now, the other important thing here, consciousness is essential for a minimal visit. Surprisingly here, we gave the example of Travenlingar in Finland up there in Tornio, and they get totally hammered on Finnish vodka or, I don't know, alcohol, and then they don't know where they're going, and they cross the bridge into Sweden. They don't remember they're in Sweden, but they are. Does that count as a visit? Now, this was our closest vote. This was where the vote had a difference of 3 votes, much to my incredible surprise. But anyway, the majority by 3 votes was that they were not in Sweden, and we will take that as a rule. If you're too drunk to remember that you were somewhere, you have not been there. It does not count as a minimal visit. Likewise, if you're sleeping, or if you're unconscious, that doesn't count either. However, if you're a business person and you're traveling for business, and so you land at an airport, there's a vehicle waiting for you, it whisks you away to some sort of offices, you have your business meeting, and then the vehicle whisks you back to the airport and you're out. This does count. 71% of you voted that this is a minimal visit to a place. Now, remember, if the meeting is inside the airport, this doesn't count because it's an airport visit. But the minute you leave and go to, let's say, the office, that will count. Similarly, even if you've only experienced a hotel night somewhere, this also counts. This was accepted by 61% of the vote. So again, so you land or you arrive in a region, you leave the transport hub, you go to your hotel, you sleep, and then you go back to your transport hub. That will give you that region as a minimal visit. Now, how are we going nuclear? And this is the last bullet point here. This has to do with special cases. We, in the second poll, asked cases such as the thorny DMZ, Golan Heights, etc. And the results again surprised me in how you were very categorically against these visits. So 83% of the respondents rejected a visit of the DMZ as a visit of North Korea. In the case of the Golan Heights, and I mean that you visit the Golan Heights from Israel, this was totally rejected as a visit to Syria by 88% of the respondents. We gave another example of a former Azerbaijan exclave, which I guess it is de jure still part of Azerbaijan, but in effect, this is now incorporated within Armenia. Does this count as a visit to Azerbaijan? Here, 62% rejected. Now, we're extrapolating this, and we're basically saying that if you visit a place which is not under the sovereignty of the country you're claiming, then you cannot claim that country as visited. Not the region, but the country. This is politically a bit thorny, and I must say that NomadMania is not taking any political stand here. The idea here is that if you're visiting a country represents a certain culture, it represents values, it represents certain symbols, if you want, of that country. If you're visiting an area which is not under the sovereignty of that country, even if it is de facto part of the country, then you're not experiencing any of these elements. Sometimes you experience the total opposite. So you cannot count that country is visited in our UN list unless you've been to areas which are under the control of the country you are claiming. That also gives it a bit of a time dimension. When did you visit? You know, maybe areas have changed sovereignty. So if you visited it when that country had control, yes, you can claim it. But if you visited it when it didn't, then no, you can't. One interesting extra example here was with an area in Haiti, which is leased to a cruise company, Labadee. I don't know if any one of you here have been to Labadee. So this area is closed off. It's technically on the island of Haiti, but it is totally managed by the cruise company. People get off the ship, they're transported there. You know, they swim, there's a restaurant, all the food even comes from the cruise ship. There's no local food. There are a few local vendors, but they are under license. They are permitted to be there. So the question here was, you know, have you been to Haiti, given that you haven't really experienced much of it? But people here were willing to accept that this is a legitimate visit by 55%. I would say this is really a sui generis example. I'm not sure there are that many areas which are leased out to cruise companies or other companies in that sense. But I guess the idea here is that they were leased out by the government of the country itself. So, I mean, that is still part of the country, even if you don't really get any feel for the country. Now, guys, believe it or not, we're almost at the end here. So, what does not count as a minimal visit in miscellaneous cases? So once again, let me go through this. Being unconscious doesn't count. Crossing a line without any experience is always rejected. And once again, visiting an area which is not in a country's control is also not a visit to the country. And you know, we all know which these, you know, de facto countries are, these problematic cases, or, you know, but we know them. In most cases, this rule, I think, is irrelevant because anyway, it's harder to visit these de facto, you know, non-UN countries than it is to visit the UN country itself. Right. So 45 minutes almost, and we are almost ready to open up for questions. Now, once again, I'd like to say a few things before I take your questions. Everything that that I introduced today is going to be online. It is available in the document, so you can review it, you can see it. The percentages of the votes are there, which means that you can actually review them and understand why we have chosen to go with them. In every case, this has depended on your vote. So not in any of the cases have we overruled your vote and gone in a different direction. Yes, there was one or two examples where between the two polls there was a difference. We took the second poll's vote as the final one. Now, when you're applying for verification, this implies that we will from now on look at our new rules. Okay, if you have a stamp in a country, an entry and exit stamp on the same date, we're going to have to scrutinize this more to see what did you actually do in that place if you came and left on the same date. Similarly, if you claim that you've been somewhere on a ship, on a cruise, we're actually going to have to check, did you get onto the island? Did you only visit the port, or did you go further away? So please understand that as a serious site, we want to be fair to everyone. And the idea here is to try as much as possible to apply these rules and create a standard that is the same for everyone. Now, what does that imply for you? Well, what it implies for you is that you should mentally review all your trips and then consider how these new rules may affect some of the regions that you have claimed as visited or not claimed as visited. And in other words, you should go back to your profile and maybe amend a few of your entries, either add regions or delete them based on these rules. So that way you would be totally in line with them. Let me also add one final thing. A few years ago, we had a referendum on the issue of what happens if you visited a place when it wasn't a country and then it became a country. For example, if you visited Tallinn in 1970 when it was part of the Soviet Union, can you count that as a visit to Estonia? And the result of that referendum at the time was 67% said yes, you can. And that is why we have not considered that example in this, because we take that referendum as definitive. So the rule is that if you visited a country which is new and used to be part of another country, you can claim it. This is not entirely against this new rule that you need to follow the sovereignty principle, because the sovereignty principle now refers to countries which are not recognized. Whereas, let's say, the Soviet Union was a recognized country, and then Estonia came out of that. Now, let me have a look here. We have many greetings. I see some people are greeting from Finland. Hello, Pirko. We have Thomas from Montenegro. We have H. Maximilian from New Zealand. And Justin Kirby from New Zealand. You're awake really early down there. We've got Jeff from Southern Indiana. Hello there. We've got Zanzibar. Now, that's interesting. Sue is in from Brighton. We've got Janie Coffey from Florida, Ted from Chicago, and Straylight from Bristol. And, of course, Don from Melbourne, and a few other people. Great. Would you have, and Lviv, I see, is present as well. So, any questions, guys? I'm going to be here a minute or two more. And if there's Essex, I see. Justine says, thank you for the question, Justine. Are you concerned that members are now more likely to ignore the rules given the increased complexity? My answer to that is that actually the rules are finally simple rather than complex. Until now, there's been so much confusion. We have come up with certain rules, but they've never really been clear. Now this is codified and it is clear. I think in every case you can refer back, and I would like to believe that these rules are now not complex, but they're actually clear. And remember, these are the rules for the minimal visit. If we are serious travelers, we should never have a minimal visit. We should always be super enthusiastic about countries and regions and explore them fully, where we don't need any of these rules, because we've spent our time there, we've seen the sites, we've seen the non-sites, we've really gone for it. So no, I think that people will welcome something that is finally codified. I think some people will really welcome the fact that based on your vote, we've taken away this silly requirement to land, which has sometimes resulted in a lot of frustrated boat travelers. I also think some people will finally realize that they need to take traveling more seriously if they want to be called real travelers. And that, claiming a region on the train when you're asleep is not really traveling. So I think this is definitely a good endeavor. And I also want to thank all of you who voted, because your vote really means something. Any other questions here? Come on, people. Now remember, today is May 27th, 2023. Many of you may watch this on playback later in the future. It will be allowed, it will be on our YouTube channel. And Straight 2 says, thanks for such a great explanation of everything, Harry. Thank you for being with me and being with us at NomadMania. I think I can wrap it up. Okay, one YouTube user says, NomadMania do not encourage people to make illegal visits. On the contrary. Yeah, well, we do not. We do not, well, first of all, we do not encourage people ever putting their lives in danger. That's insane. We also do not encourage people breaking rules. Visas are there for a reason. What we are just saying is that based on your vote, legality on its own was not found to be a criterion for whether something does or doesn't count as a minimal visit. So you can still count regions or even countries as visited, even if you've been there illegally, as long as the other criteria have been followed. This is, again, your vote. But that doesn't mean that we encourage this in any way. Quite the contrary. If my experience is anything to go by, the one time I did something illegal, I ended up in jail, and I have definitely learned my lesson. So no, you do not want to be in a Yemen jail. Absolutely not. Guys, it is Saturday evening. I'm in Luxembourg, and I think I'm going to go out and enjoy the city a bit, because the weather here has been fantastic. Thank you all for joining the first ever NomadMania webinar. Remember, the webinars are going to be held on the last Saturday of every month. So the next webinar is on Saturday, June 24th, when Cameron Mofid is going to talk about our mental health poll, which some of you might have answered and contributed to in the past. And he will generally make a webinar on travel and mental health. So that is surely going to be interesting and worth viewing. Thank you so much for being with us, and a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. Over and out. And yes, Jeff is asking a last question. Are there ways for members to share ideas and inspiration? Jeff, you can always contact us, and we will always try. Well, first of all, we will always respond to every message we get, but we will always try to incorporate your ideas in what we do, whether it is our lists themselves, our series, or our strategic plans for features that we will try to incorporate in the future. We definitely have big plans, so we need you. It's not only are there ways, we encourage you to write to us. The best way is to send us an email or to contact us via Contact Us. But if you want to, there's also the Facebook page. You can write through there, and we'll try to get back. Wonderfully nerdy webinar. Excuse me, this is not nerdy at all. This is essential and very important, said with a little bit of a pinch of salt. So nerdy or not nerdy, that's for you to decide, I guess. We have our rules based on your vote, and we now know what is a minimal visit. So yes, the question is, in case Bougainville becomes a UN country in the future, and someone has been there when it's part of PNG, will it be counted as a visit to the new UN country? The answer is yes. I just said that if you've been to Tallinn in 1970, when Estonia didn't exist independently, but it was part of the Soviet Union, the referendum we had a few years ago indicated that 67% voted yes. A visit to a region is always a visit. And so even if the sovereignty changes from one legitimate entity to another legitimate entity, then you can count the new one. So with Bougainville, if you've already been there, if it becomes independent, you can claim it as visited. Same with any other new country that springs up, provided that it's legitimate and that the succession is done legitimately. In cases of contested sovereignty, things are more complex. Great. Well, we'll see you next webinar on June 24th. Over and out. Thank you very much for being with us. Bye.